what's going on internationally. How do we get to the place where, Putin decides he's going to just invade Russia? Nothing like this has happened since World War II.
Basically, if you have the right technology, the same way that we saw, for example, the Chinese team in Turkey being able to indicate whether or not that rubble had a live human being under it because they had the right equipment to detect heartbeats from under the rubble. If Syria had that, that would have been easier to find the people and to help those in need, especially the ones who were still alive. But Syria is not even allowed to buy these, even if she did want to buy them, because of the sanctions. Helpless people are buried under the rubble and they need our help. People who are trapped started screaming their hearts out because they need someone to help them. And no one can because they can't see. They don't have the equipment. They don't have light. They don't have electricity. I don't know if you saw the videos where people were using their hands to try to remove the rubble to try and get to their loved ones.
Marwa Osman is a Lebanese journalist and esteemed political commentator, host and producer of the Mideast Stream on Press TV, and a university lecturer holding a PhD and 2 master's degrees. Marwa, first of all, I'm relieved that you and your family are okay. The first news I actually heard about the earthquakes was from you, your update about getting your children outside just after, I think it was after 3 a.m.
Well, when we woke up on that day, February 6th, 3:20 a.m. In the morning, I was actually already up because there was a big storm hitting us and there were some noises coming from the balcony. So I asked my husband to go and tie some things up so we wouldn't have some kind of an accident. And he did. And we were just discussing whether we should get the kids tomorrow to school or not, because the storm is really hard and everything started shaking. It started really, really slow, but then it was something like we've never witnessed before. We have been through very tiny earthquakes that you just see things move fast and then it stops. But this was not fast movement. This was actual swaying. The entire building was swaying in all directions, and it was very, very scary. Even my kids woke up, which usually they sleep heavily. They don't wake up on any noises, but it was very strong. The tremors were just increasing. It was about more than 65 seconds. So it was long. During those seconds, when the building started swaying heavily, we just pulled the kids out, put the shoes on, and I looked in the mirror before I left the house. It was still shaking. I forgot to wear my hijab. I went back. I got my hijab and we went downstairs. We got in the car and then we drove off, because at the moment that happened, when we started driving off, it had ended. It was still going on when we were going down the stairs, but when we got in the car and we drove away, we went to an open space. What happened is that when we got to the open space, and because we were sitting in the car and the car was still on, and we were listening to the radio, apparently a second one happened, but we didn't feel it. But the fear in the eyes of the people at 3:30 a.m. in the morning, it was horrific, and we had a big storm, and we didn't know yet what was about to hit us. The big news of Kahraman Marash and of Aleppo, Latakia, Hama, and Jable. So just hours later, and it wasn't like we just knew that then and there that a big earthquake had hit Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. We didn't know how hard it was. But then, like an hour or an hour and a half later, we started seeing photos and videos, CCTV camera videos that were horrific. And then when the morning arrived on Tuesday, it was, you would, on Monday, actually, it was on Monday, you would think that this is something that we have seen before, given the fact that we are in a region that has seen a lot of wars, a lot of devastation. We have seen a lot of buildings fall down before, but because of rockets and missiles. But the level of devastation that we saw, it was beyond what a human being can practically describe. And especially when it hit Syria, I know it hit Turkey and Syria together, but when it hit Syria after 11 years of global war, and especially in the areas that were highly affected by the war, namely Hama and Aleppo, you feel like you are helpless. And that feeling, along with the feeling of fear, constant fear all the time, looking at the chandeliers, seeing if there's an actual another one or not, because they started hitting one after the other. It didn't stop. I think I was reading the other day that we were hit with more than 600 aftermath shocks and earthquakes, but the ones that we really felt were those two in the early morning, and then in the same day at 12 p.m. Midday at noon we had a strong one as well, but not as strong as what we felt during at dawn. But that sadly, that one at 12 p.m. also brought down more buildings that were already shaken in Syria and Turkey, and which led to more horrific news coming from both countries. But this is about the fear, and then I can like write books about the PTSD that everyone is living through, from the kids to the grown-ups to everyone. It took me 7 days to be able to sleep. I started waking up every night at the same time that the earthquake happened because something woke me up. I don't know what it is. I just kept waking up and just not going to sleep. I couldn't sleep for like 7 days until I changed my entire area. I took my kids down south. I wanted them to not feel stressed all the time. They had a nice time in South Lebanon, in the village. 2 days, then we came back. I started going back to the routine, and this is what the people are doing, going back to their routine habits, daily habits, in order to get out of that PTSD. But we work in the media, Eva, and the things that we've seen and we still see, and our friends who consider family in Syria that we talk to, or in Turkey, even if they are in Istanbul or Ankara, when we talk to them, their devastation, it's beyond what humans can handle. And in Syria, I had we were working together from day one on everything, trying to get the help, the relief, everything. But one that got through to me was one of my guests that was with me on the latest episode, Antoine, who was supposed to be with me, but that morning he went and visited Jable, and then he came back to Aleppo. And his eyes, all the time he's talking and he's trying not to shed a tear, but at the end, when he told me that the things that I lived through today in Jable, and he couldn't continue his sentence, that just broke me, because Jable is one of the very few villages that did not see war, but then was devastated by the earthquake. Jable is one of the villages that actually got a lot of displaced Syrians to be living in because of the war, and then they ended up losing their lives that way. So it's very devastating. Aleppo being dubbed as the devastated city, Al-Madina al-Mankuba, it's also beyond words, especially with our Lebanese friends from different communities and societies and non-governmental organizations that took aid and went there and saw for themselves. They came back with horrific feelings, with helplessness, despite the fact that they were just there helping. But this is what we are feeling right now. We're feeling that we have a lot of power to give, a lot of energy to give, but we can't do anything, especially because of the sanctions. We're trying to help, but it's already devastating in Syria because of the accumulative effect of the sanctions. Because when you're not ready for such a disaster, because of the sanctions that you've been going through, no machinery, no technology, no necessary infrastructure, no rebuilding, no reconstruction after the war, because you're not allowed to, because companies are not allowed to work with you as a government or as a country, you get to a devastating disaster like this one and you have nothing. You don't even have ambulances enough to get the people to hospitals, or sadly to get their bodies to the burial places, to the cemeteries. So it's devastating. Yeah. It's beyond what anyone can imagine. I know that Turkey got a big hit as well, but the issue is all of the help, all of the media, all of the attention went to Turkey, and it should, but it should be given equally. It should not be dissected. Humanity should not be dissected. It should not be divided. But sadly, we are at a point where in this modern time of a history where we're supposed to stand by one another as human beings to begin with, it was shattered at the border of Syria.
You see these Western State Department spokespersons, or whatever their position is, blaming the Syrian government, of course, as they always do, and Syria's allies for anything that occurs, including a natural disaster, and then politicizing, as you said, humanitarian aid. It's just despicable what these Western hyenas are doing to the Syrian people, all in the name of helping them, of course. In addition to preventing humanitarian aid from reaching displaced Syrians, how else are the sanctions impacting on the rescue efforts?
Well, let us begin by how they have impacted so far, and then after the earthquake, how the impact was.
Yeah.
Before the earthquake, the sanctions worked on three specialized levels. The first level is on the financial institutions that are directly linked in Syria to the government. For example, like if you want to wire money from outside Syria to any bank in Syria, it has to go like any other country through the central bank of that country. So the central bank of Syria is being sanctioned and has been sanctioned since the early times of the war. And during these new statements issued by the US, by the way, 7 days after actually, or it was 8 days after the actual tragedy, when they said that they want to lift some of the sanctions for humanitarian reasons, that one is not lifted, which means if you want to transfer and wire money to the people affected by the earthquake to their bank accounts in Syria, you can't, because it's still under sanctions, because the central bank is under sanctions, and no bank inside Syria can accept a wire transfer without the acceptance of the central bank. This is how it goes in every country. Mm-hmm. So the first one is affecting financial institutions, even the private ones. Remember, at the beginning of the war, we were able to send, for example, through Western Union, help to Syria from outside Lebanon and even from Lebanon. And I used to send a lot, especially through the fundings that we would get from our friends from all across the world to certain families, especially families that were suffering because of the sanctions on, number two, the health sector in Syria, because they say no, the sanctions are not, but the sanctions are on everything within the governmental institutions in Syria, one of which is the Ministry of Health, which controls all the health sector in Syria, because Syria does have privatized hospitalization sector, but majorly all the hospitals in Syria are controlled by the government, because everyone has the right to have medical attention in Syria. It's not like the US. You don't die on the doors of the hospitals because you don't have insurance. In Syria, you're sick, you go see a doctor, a surgery is given to you in a governmental institution, in a governmental hospital owned by the government, which is owned by the people. So by doing these sanctions on all institutions related to the Syrian government, you, by default, sanctioned the health sector in Syria, meaning no more hospitals orderly being operating, no medical equipment, no medicine, drugs. Thank God Syria has a couple of factories that actually does its drugs for itself, but other very serious for chronic disease drugs that cannot be transferred anymore from outside Syria into Syria because of the sanctions. And then you have also the matter of sanctioning oil, sanctioning any company or any state from buying oil from Syria. Added to that, the occupation that's actually sitting on the two biggest oil fields in Syria, Al Omar oil field and Conoco oil field in the eastern part of the Euphrates. So you have the actual physical occupation by US soldiers protecting the oil from the natives. So you're stealing the resources and saying, no, we're stealing them, we're protecting them so the government wouldn't steal them and benefit from it. This is Syrian oil for the Syrian people. If you sanction the oil, it means no more electricity. No more electricity, it means you are breaking the economy. And you're breaking the health sector as well. Again, because what kind of hospital that doesn't have electricity can operate? People on dialysis. Can you imagine people having operation, surgery, and under surgery, lights go out? Why? Because there's no enough oil, no enough fuel to actually operate the generators and give electricity, or to operate the grid, the main grid for the government, to give electricity for the people. Now imagine no fuel, mean no industry, no machinery, no institutions operating the way they are. Some places, no school, because if you don't have fuel, you don't have a bus, people can't take the bus to go to school or to university to get their education. So it also effectively turning the community from illiterate one into an illiterate one. And add to that, the third form of sanctions is sanctioning any country that would dare deal with the Syrian government, whether by tenure, by having agreements, by selling them products, especially medical products that they need, or medical equipment that they need, or machinery that they need for reconstruction, or, for example, ambulances. If they have a catastrophe, you're not allowed to deal with them, or else you also will be sanctioned, whether you're an entity, a company, or a state. And the US has been effectively, for the past decade, basically gangstering around these states and threatening them, whether directly or indirectly, putting them in a spot where they are afraid to try and even help, not even if they want to make any kind of an economic agreement with Syria. So this was over the past 10 years. Fast forward to the devastated earthquake that affected huge swaths of land in Syria. Added to that, as we already said, the infrastructure is destroyed because of the war. There's no electricity, there's no heavy machinery to operate to try and get the people out of the rubble, because if you did have the technology, you would at least have cut the losses by a third, not to say half, because you don't know how the people are, how they are being actually imprisoned under the rubble, or being affected by how the flat or the apartment fell. But basically, if you have the right technology, the same way that we saw, for example, the Chinese team in Turkey being able to indicate whether or not that rubble had a live human being under it, because they had the right equipment to detect heartbeats from under the rubble. If Syria had that, that would have been easier to find the people and to help those in need, especially the ones who were still alive. But Syria is not even allowed to buy these, even if she did want to buy them, because of the sanctions. Mm-hmm. So that's then. After the earthquake, everyone from the very first hour, when the light of day started breaking on February 6th, on Monday, and people started seeing the devastation, everyone immediately said, the friends and the foes of Syria were saying the sanctions should be lifted now, because people need our help. Helpless people are buried under the rubble and they need our help. It breaks me when I was talking to one of my friends and they said, we are afraid of the night. The first night when Monday passed, when it was Monday night, and generators are turned off at night in Syria, so most houses don't have electricity, they don't have light, so all the noise of the day actually calms down, so it's very calm, it's very silent, and they start hearing screams coming from the outside, which means people who are trapped started screaming their hearts out because they need someone to help them, and no one can, because they can't see. They don't have the equipment, they don't have light, they don't have electricity, they started, I don't know if you saw the videos where people were using their hands to try to remove the rubble, to try and get to their loved ones. Yeah. I mean, what are we? Is this like the Middle Ages? It's not. Which brings us to the effect of these sanctions. People started saying, lift the sanctions, and the US blatantly started saying, but the US, the sanctions doesn't actually affect the humanitarian aid to Syria. Really? If it didn't affect the humanitarian aid, why did everyone wait until you said, well, it's okay, we're lifting the sanctions for 180 days, you can go ahead and send the aid? If it doesn't affect, why did these countries, especially European countries, wait? And even after that, European countries, which were led by Italy, sent a plane to Lebanon instead of Aleppo. They send a plane to Lebanon, which means add 10 or 12 hours to those hours, that timing of landing, add 12 hours for these equipment and this help to be sent to Syria. If at the moment this plane lands, people actually start taking the things and driving them to Syria. If it doesn't take 2 or 3 hours to actually unload first. So you're talking about 15 to 17 hours till the actual help gets there. Why? Because they decided to land in Beirut instead of Aleppo itself. Mm-hmm. So this is the amount of inhumane, despicable sense of evil behavior. You cannot describe it otherwise. I used to sometimes giggle when someone say that the US is the devil or the US is the evil of this world. I mean, these kind of words are like a bit, it's not professional, it's not really objective. You have to name things. No, they're evil. They are the, I mean, if there is something bad in this word, in the world that we live in, if there's something that is equivalent to the word bad, it's the US. It is the United States of America's foreign policy. So no aid can get there, no help can get there. People started GoFundMe pages, the GoFundMe pages started being stopped and put on lockdown. They couldn't even send the money. They couldn't even send the money to their own accounts where they opened the funds. The page just went away with all the money that it had collected. Now, people were trying to reach Lebanese societies, Lebanese NGOs. I myself was in direct contact with some of my friends in Syria, and he said, look, we need money. We need to get not only aid, we need money to get things ready, to buy the machine that we need, to buy everything that we need. We need funds. And I said, I'm going to try and ask some of the NGOs in Lebanon that I actually trust, because we do have a lot of literal civil societies, not the US funded NGOs. We do have a lot of civil societies in Lebanon. So I asked a couple of them that I trusted, and they said, they literally said, I was talking to one of them and he said, you know, I don't know, I'm about to cry, but I have to tell you that if we accept funds and funds started coming to us and then we got sanctioned because of the sanctions, because of the US Treasury gets just a smell that this money is going to Syria, all our work that the Lebanese people are benefiting from would be cut off. So they were afraid because of the sanctions in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Lebanon, which is usually a country that is against US imperialism, against colonialism. We operate like we don't care. We don't care. But they have the capability to stop our everyday efforts. I mean, they have stopped me from using Western Union. You know, we were trying to help. You remember Joud, the young boy who passed away in Syria because there was no enough medical supplies to help his condition, and he passed. We were trying to raise money for him, and I was sending money to his family, and I was able to do that 3 times. The 4th time I was blocked, and that was back in 2018. Yeah. So I'm blocked from using Western Union since 2018 because I tried to help families in need inside Syria. And all the while, billions of dollars were being funneled to terrorists inside Syria.
I'm sorry to interrupt that. That's you just went to the point I was going to ask you to make, is that again, the hypocrisy of the fact that the West fomented the war in the first place, funded and armed and backed the terrorists that slaughtered the Syrian people, that damaged the infrastructure, that continue to occupy northwestern Syria, that weren't allowing aid into that area, the aid that the West wanted to send in. And then the Hayat Tahrir Sham is demanding like obscene amounts of money to allow trucks in, as they've done in every area they occupied in Syria, whether it was Aleppo or Madaya or Eastern Ghouta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, using, again, holding civilians as human shields, and the civilians that are there are being denied aid that desperately need it. And then you have these fundraising efforts from abroad to terrorist factions in Syria, and they're not impeded. I know over the years I've spoken with a doctor in the US who jumped through every hoop to send, as a legitimate charity, to send aid to Syria in the form of medical aid. I believe he was trying to send it from one of the Gulf states. There's the Red Crescent in one of the Gulf states to Syria as a gift, funded by charities in the US, and he was stymied, you know. And even back in 2016 in Aleppo, I'm sure you know Dr. Nabil Antaki. He's a gastroenterologist, and I remember him telling me it took him, I don't remember exactly, but let's say around 1 year just to get a simple part for his practice. And this was him just trying to get a simple part so he could do his gastroenterology practice. I think people, obviously you do, and people who follow your work do, but I think your average person perhaps doesn't realize the depth of the impact of the sanctions before this catastrophe. I mean, even something like if you think of Syria and how many people have been maimed there, their ability to get prosthetic limbs, or like you're saying about, like, I just don't think your average person can comprehend going to a hospital and not having electricity, not having all the medicines, not having painkillers even. all the things that we take for granted. And while we're speaking of this, I do just want to say, and I'm sure you can say the same for Yemen, but of course, this is what the Palestinians of Gaza have been enduring since 2006 or 7, and the siege imposed on them. And I do think it's always obviously important to note that, as I know you always do. But back to this hypocrisy of what aid is allowed to go to Syria and what aid is not. I know that mutual friends of ours, Kevork and Haneen, were working on the GoFundMe, and it was stopped. What's the latest with that?
It's back operating, and the good news is yesterday and the day before they were able to wire some of the money, obviously to Lebanon, not to Syria, but to very good friends, very good community friends, especially Christian civil societies right here in Lebanon that received some of the money, and it was already en route to Syria yesterday. So thankfully, that started working. I mean, but that has nothing to do with lifting the sanctions. That just has to do with the adamant and collective effort that Kevork and Haneen and all our friends in Europe were doing to try and get the GoFundMe page back, and with them actually involving lawyers on board, because that was against every law that such a platform would offer to its people to use, which made them and it cornered them. It put them at a very hot spot, which led them to reopening that page. And thankfully, alhamdulillah, the targeted amount was met, but we still need more. I mean, like Eva, last night, Turkey opened all its TV channels live on the same feed, and it had all the stars, whether they are actors or singers in Turkey, and their initiative was called Turkey One Heart. And a matter of 6 hours on live TV, they were able to raise more than $4 billion of funds. $4 billion.
Yeah.
This is what Syria needs, but this is what Syria is not allowed to have. Why? Because all the money was wired via banking operations. If the sanctions are really lifted, you will see 10 times the amount of money that was raised in Turkey being sent from all over the world to Syria. This is what Syria needs. What more does the United States of America want? It broke Syria. It destroyed it. It allowed the northern part to be occupied by terrorists. It is now occupying the eastern part of the Euphrates and stealing all the oil. It burned all the wheat in the northern part of Syria, so Syria would starve. What more? What do they want? What do they want? More than 7,000 humans died like that in 60 seconds with no help, with all the help that we can provide. We're not able to give it. Thankfully, the friends of Syria are vast. Syria is not alone. We saw that on the first day when 7 or 8 states broke that siege without even turning to the United States of America, on top of which was Algeria and Lebanon. And I'm very proud. I was very proud of that moment, despite the fact that I was devastated that Syria needed us that much. And also, I would emphasize that what we saw from the United Arab Emirates was unprecedented and much needed at that time. And I wish that the other Gulf countries took the initiative that the United Arab Emirates did, because it was that time where you should have shown your brotherly connection to Syria and not left it alone, not waited till the United States of America said, okay, now we can allow you. Up until now, there are still states who did not even offer a help. For example, like the state of Kuwait. Where are they? They blockaded the Syrian embassy in Kuwait from actually taking funds from the Syrians who lived there to get it to their families. They didn't allow the embassy to operate. So they actually illegally invaded the sovereignty of Syria, but not allowing the embassy to operate like it should help its country when it's in such a devastating natural disaster. The audacity, but not the people, the governments, not the people. The level of love that the Arabian people are showing for Syria, that the Islamic world, that the world is showing to Syria is so heartwarming. But look how strong we are and how many of us there is. But still, those sanctions, it's like an illusion. This illusion of sanctions, it's what's breaking Syria right now. And this has to stop.
Marwa, I do want to talk with you about events in occupied Palestine, but I think we should leave it today because I think the emphasis is on the sanctions and how debilitating they are. And I think that you've really hammered that point home. Is there anything else you want to say about in terms of Lebanese Hezbollah or the Lebanese?
Yeah, well, the Lebanese stayed because on Monday, when the earthquake happened, the first hours of the day, we had a live statement from the Minister of Construction in Lebanon, Minister of Transportation and Construction in Lebanon. And he's by the way, he's a minister that is affiliated with Hezbollah. That's why he had the bravery to actually step out and say Lebanon has decided, and he didn't decide it on his own. He actually spoke with the caretaker, Prime Minister, caretaker of the government, Najib Miqati, and he took the okay from his boss, basically the Prime Minister, and he went out into the public and said Lebanon has decided that the Lebanese International Airport and all the seaports of Lebanon are open for Syria, free, exempted from taxes. Any company, any state that would like to use the facilities of Lebanon to get aid, humanitarian aid, and any kind of relief to Syria, they are welcome without any fees. And I think that was very, very important because basically, as if you're saying to Syria, you can operate as if this is your own. Mm-hmm. This is what you're telling them. And this was very important. And the lifeline, the highway that connects Beirut to Damascus was alive, and still on a daily basis, but it was alive during those first 3 days in a way like a blood vein that goes from a vital organ to another vital organ, transporting the so much needed oxygen to our brothers and sisters in Syria. But that is not enough. I cannot stress enough by saying that Syria needs everyone, and we need to help in any way possible. Lebanon is being a hub in order to help Syria. You can't wire money to Syria. You can wire it to Lebanon. I would advise not to wire to banks because now our banks are in Lebanon are on a strike. So even if you wire, we can't go there and then get the money and get it to Syria. The best way right now is to use Western Union or Wish or MoneyGram. Send through these financial institutions to people that you trust in Lebanon, to institutions that you trust in Lebanon that can give the helping aid to the Syrians, because the Syrian Red Crescent actually has an account in Lebanon, but banks are on a strike. They're closed. And today was a very, very serious day in Lebanon because 7 banks were burnt in Lebanon by the people. Yeah, because I mean, our lira just collapsed in a way that no one has imagined yet. Today the Lebanese lira pegged to the dollar is $1 equals 80,000 Lebanese lira. So things are going downhill, a nosedive in Lebanon. So try not to wire money through the banks. Use the financial institutions. Try to push your representatives to push the United States of America to lift those sanctions. And please, please, no one tell me again we should appeal to the United Nations. I mean, Antonio Guterres is waiting till next month to make a visit to Syria. And I wish to God that the Syrians will show him a very nice welcome when he arrives, because he deserves to be thrown by stones and shoes, not to be welcomed. But I know the Syrian people, and I know that they welcome him with a very big heart and hope that the United Nations actually do its job once in a while and try to help the Syrian people and try to ease the sanctions and try to put the train of peace on the right track. So basically, that's what I have to say. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about Palestine because unprecedented events are taking place in occupied Palestine. And we are looking at a very, very decisive year.
Let's resume this conversation next week then. We'll start right there with occupied Palestine and what's been happening there. And I just want to thank you because, look, you're from the region. You're somebody I've known for many years. I trust you. You're a principled, honest journalist, but more so you care about the people. You know, you actually care. It's very evident in your face and your voice and the energy that you're devoting to trying to help your family, your brothers and sisters in Syria. So thank you for that. And thank you for being a voice on the ground that we can trust.
That's my duty, and
update us.
That's basically my duty as a Levantine, as a Syrian. I am from Lebanon, but Lebanon is part of Syria, whether people like it or not. And we are one people. We have same history. We are living the same life. We have the same future. I want to thank you, Eva, because it's because of the likes of you, people like you who have loved Syria and considered it its home and spoke about it wherever they go, despite the fact that you were harassed many times because of it, whether online or even by certain intelligence agencies. you still stood by your stance, by your position, by your love and affection and truth towards Syria and the Syrian people. So I thank you for shedding light where it should be shed, especially right now with the devastating effect of the earthquake on Syria.